close out this morning, before we move on to another section of the day, we're doing what we have had for the last 9 years or 8 years maybe. We've had Wayne Fishburne on stage delivering us always an amazing, one of the most popular sessions, always looking into the crystal ball of finance and funding and all of the things that go along in that area. So, but this year we have a new person coming from the same firm, Cooley, and I'd love to welcome Jeff Starr to the stage. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thanks, Jill, and to all of you. What a powerful video. It's tough to see something like that and just not think how exciting it is to be a part of this world. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here to talk about the incredible growth that we saw in digital health funding over the course of the last year, as well as what I think we can expect to see in 2019. But before I start, I want to tell you about Maria. For years, Maria was in and out of homes and shelters, often out of touch with her family. Living with mental illness, she was unable to care for herself. She was a frequent visitor to the emergency room, but the truth is she was actually afraid of the hospital and often avoided getting the care that she needed. She knew she had Medicaid, but she didn't know what that meant. No one had ever spent the time explaining her health condition or the care options that were available to her. Like many living with mental illness or limited access to care, Maria needed someone to step in, help her understand her situation, and get the care she needed. And so when team members of Behave Care, a digital health startup, first met Maria in a small community center outside Providence, Rhode Island, they developed a relationship with her that allowed them to help her improve her health and ultimately transform her life. After using care coordination and clinical decision support tools to create a personalized care plan that fit with Maria's goals, they helped her improve her health using digital tools like remote monitoring and medication adherence programs and telemedicine that ultimately set her on a path that resulted in reduced ER visits as well as a much more meaningful and productive life. Behave Care is just one of the many companies that was funded last year, and it really represents, I think, in a small way, the promise and the potential behind digital health. It's also a good reminder for me that behind all of the deals and dollars that we're going to talk about, actual lives are being changed. So here's the headline for 2018. Last year we saw more money, more deals, and larger deals in digital health. And while we'll get to the details in a minute, I think it's safe to say that last year was a banner year for digital health investment. Over the course of the next few minutes, I want to take a look at a few things. First, we'll look at where the money went, who got it, how much they got, who's spending it. We'll take a quick look at deal activity of the last year, which, while not particularly robust, still included some notable transactions and generally remained pretty steady. And then third, we'll close with a few predictions for 2019. Before I do that, though, let me just take a quick minute, introduce myself, tell you a little bit about Cooley and the companies that we work with. As Jill mentioned, I'm a partner at Cooley. I work in our Princeton office. I work with companies, high-growth companies that operate in technology-focused industries. I also work with the investors that fund those companies. I spend a lot of time assisting clients with their financing activities. I also help them in strategic transactions like an M&A or an IPO event. I also come from a family of clinicians, and so healthcare has always been a part of my life, something that I'm passionate about, something that I enjoy working in. As for Cooley, we're the law firm of the new economy. Our clients are driving technological innovation here in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, and beyond. We have one of the most active venture capital fund formation practices in the world. We also boast premier practices in technology and the life sciences and healthcare industries. We're the #1 firm for venture financings and IPOs over the last several years, and over 50% of the companies listed on the NASDAQ Biotech Index are our clients. Our experience working with tech and healthcare and life sciences innovators puts us in a unique position as these industries continue to converge. We've had a dedicated digital health practice for over a decade. And during that time, we've seen a lot of exciting changes and a lot of exciting growth, but nothing like we saw last year. This is a slide that many of you may have seen recently. It's an annual summary that Rock Health publishes that shows the activity in the digital health industry. The graph shows on the left total venture funding, and we see last year the aggregate dollars invested into the industry topped $8 billion, over $2 billion increase from the prior year. We also see an uptick in the number of deals. And more deals is good, and it's a good sign. It suggests that more people are spending more time on digital health as a distinct asset class. We also see across the bottom the average deal size shot up to nearly $22 million. And while that in part skewed by the 10 or so mega deals that we saw last year, and these are deals in excess of over $100 million, even netting those out, we're still seeing the average deal size about $2 million greater last year than the prior year. Last year, half of the deals were seed and Series A deals, which I think is interesting. It suggests that investors continue to place bets on new entrants to the market as they double down on the more maturing companies. But fundraising rounds were bigger at all stages, and that's something that we think is consistent with a general trend in venture as investors are putting more money to work earlier in an effort to accelerate growth. And consistent with that is what we're seeing with respect to the sequencing of funding, and that's accelerating as well. And so the time between seed and A and B is getting shorter and shorter. Again, investors are putting more money to work more quickly, all in an effort to accelerate growth. This is a slide that we've put together that really gives you a sense of the scope and the scale of the industry. It identifies companies that have raised significant amounts of money, $50 million, $100 million, or had significant liquidity events like an acquisition or an IPO transaction. A lot of these companies, I'm sure, are familiar to you. They're high-profile, notable companies. I actually went back and looked at this data from about 6 years ago when we put together a similar slide. And I think there were a dozen companies in total on the slide, no M&A activity and no IPO activity, which gives you, I think, a sense of the tremendous amount of growth that we've seen in a relatively short period. So the data in the deal size is important, but the numbers alone never tell the full story of the investment activity. And so let's take a quick look at the sectors within the industry that attracted the most investment last year. First up is regulated devices. And when we talk about regulated devices, we're referring to clinically validated solutions that have been cleared or approved by a regulatory group like FDA. Some of these devices or solutions complement traditional treatments by helping patients manage their conditions, such as when and how much medication to take. Others offer alternative treatments to traditional therapies like sensory stimuli that's transmitted through a handheld or a tablet that's used to manage insomnia or depression. Let me go back. But we saw an increasing number of companies cracking the regulatory code last year. I think over 36 companies were given the green light by FDA. And again, all of this points to a general maturing of the industry as the regulatory process historically been long and costly one, and one reserved for people with a lot of patience and a lot of money. But we're seeing some success, and Propeller Health is a good example of this. This is one of the digital medicine pioneers founded in 2011. They developed a clinically validated FDA-cleared sensor to help patients and physicians better understand asthma and COPD. It's now one of the leading solutions for respiratory disease management. They raised over $65 million over the course of 6 years. In 2016, they were cleared by the FDA for use with GSK's Ellipta inhaler. They subsequently formed a partnership with Express Scripts now part of Cigna, obviously, and recently purchased by ResMed for $225 million as they seek to become a leader in the industry. Next up is Genomics, which really is a tale about data and data analysis. 23andMe, I'm sure, is a very familiar name to you, one of the leaders in the consumer genomics space. They've obviously raised a lot of money, and this last year they entered into a groundbreaking collaboration with GSK that, in addition to a rather nice payment to 23andMe, gives GSK access to all of 23andMe's phenotypic and genome data that they've collected from consenting customers over the years. And GSK is going to use this to improve drug target selection and also hopefully improve the identification and recruitment of patients for clinical trials, which is something that's plagued the pharmaceutical development industry for a long time. FDA also recently granted 23andMe authorization to offer reports on pharmacogenetics, which will give customers insight into how their genetics actually influence the way they metabolize medication. WuXi NextCode, this is a platform that tackles population genomic projects. They recently raised $200 million by a deal led by Ireland Strategic Investment Fund, and this is on the heels of a $240 million investment round the prior year. We saw other top-tier funds like Sequoia involved in this transaction, and WuXi intends to enroll and sequence the entire genome of over 400,000 people in Ireland. And their efforts are consistent with other efforts we're seeing around the world to sequence large groups of people, largely in an attempt to what some refer to as democratize the genomic study or expand the demographic scope of the information that we have available to study. Finally, a significant amount of money raised last year went into companies offering on-demand healthcare services. And this, admittedly, is a broad, diverse category that includes everything from telehealth. American Well raised almost $300 million last year, to fitness and wellness, Peloton, bringing in over $500 million last year, to diagnostic and disease management solutions like Butterfly and Virta. And just as an aside, if you haven't seen Butterfly's handheld ultrasound product, it is absolutely amazing. I told you I come from a family of clinicians. My grandfather spent most of his career as a surgeon in remote parts of Central and East Africa, and I can only imagine what something like this would have meant for him and what it will mean for people living in remote areas that don't have direct access to modern hospitals. So who's investing in digital health? This slide gives you a good sense of who the major players are currently. And interestingly, the majority of investors this past year in digital health were repeat investors, though we're continuing to see new ones enter the mix every year. And I think what's interesting, when you look at the mix of investors, you do see some names here that you traditionally would associate with healthcare. But you also see some names up here like Canaan and Polaris that are traditional life sciences focused funds that have moved into the industry, as well as traditional tech funds like First Round that have gotten into the mix. First Round, I think, invested in close to 5 or 6 companies last year, indicating a real commitment, I think, to the space. We also saw an uptick last year in activity by corporate venture funds. We mentioned GSK's collaboration with 23andMe. Roche acquired Flatiron. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, for close to $2 billion. And while pharma's activity in the industry was the greatest, we also saw payers and providers getting in on the mix. And we heard earlier today about Cigna and what they're doing, including expanding their commercial partnership with OnDemand Health, which created a digital therapeutic to help manage chronic diseases. Tech also got into the action last year, and we'll hear, I think, later today about Best Buy's acquisition of GreatCall, which I think surprised a lot of people. And we recently heard about Philips and what they're doing, including with respect to focus on remote monitoring. The activity by tech, I think, is particularly interesting because there's obviously been a lot of conversation around tech and its involvement in in digital health and healthcare and how it can improve healthcare. I think that what we're going to see is not just tech helping us make sense of the data and so on, but really working to stoke demand and serving to educate consumers and ultimately expanding the market for everyone involved. Interestingly, some of you may have seen the Wall Street Journal article this past weekend on the hiring by Blink Health, which is an online marketplace for the buying of prescriptions, and their hiring of executives from Kayak and Orbitz, as well as doubling the number of engineers they have, all in recognition of the need that they need people with these kind of skills to ultimately be successful. Last year, we saw a rather steady flow of M&A activity as well. Not particularly robust, but I think that generally tracked broader trends just generally in healthcare and in tech. But we see here that there was a pretty steady state of activity, and those sectors that were most active, genomics, EHR, and clinical workflow, they make sense in the sense that these are some of the older sectors within the industry, and so they're at a later maturation point, which I think will mean more consolidation, more activity generally. So all this leads into what we expect to see in 2019. And based on the activity we saw at the end of last year, as well as what we're involved in now and what we see in the pipeline, we fully expect that the money is going to continue to flow into the industry. Maybe not at the same volume that we saw in 2018, but we still expect it to be very, very healthy as investors continue to be really excited about this industry and the opportunity it presents. We think it's largely going to be driven by, among other things, the following. Pharma's going to continue its march into digital, investing in acquiring, creating products and solutions that make their existing therapies more effective. You may have heard it said that it's no longer enough to be a pill company. I mentioned Roche earlier. Recently, the Roche CEO was interviewed and referred to his company as a pharmaceutical and data science company. And I think that mindset is consistent across big pharma now, and we've heard a lot about it, but every single large pharmaceutical company in the world now has a digital officer in its C-suite, which I think just gives you a good sense of the seriousness which they're taking all of this. Pharma's going to continue its interest in digital therapeutics, not only because they have regulatory experience and expertise that they seek to leverage, but also because from many people's perspective, it represents a real best-in-class type of asset and may offer some exclusivity as well. We're also going to see tech continue its move into healthcare, and not just, as I said, in the sense that tech's going to help us make sense of all the data that we've collected over the years, but really, I think tech is going to help us take advantage. We've heard about this earlier today, of its focus on the consumer experience. Again, something that healthcare hasn't done well, that tech has done very, very well. Last year, patient experience was an incredibly hot space to be in, and we expect that to continue. Finally, continued integration of the industry, and not just in the sense that we'll see more continued integration of care, less siloed care, but really across the spectrum, from traditional life sciences to healthcare in the sense that most people think about it, from product development to commercialization to treatment and prevention. As we continue to get our arms around what value-based care payment schemes really mean, you're going to see more collaboration among pharma and providers and payers to make sure that the right medicine's getting to the right person at the right time and at the right price. And so we're bullish on 2019. We're excited about what lies ahead. We wish you guys the best of luck. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jill, and thank you very much.
Thank you.